I was hopelessly a poet, and found solace in the early 70s. The world was coming apart a little bit. I went to a high school in Maryland where lots of dismissed and disgraced Nixon Nixon administration kids also attended, and so there was actually after the 60s, and it just felt like the world was kind of coming apart. There's so much bad behavior in my high school, and writing actually was really stabilizing for me. And I remember and isolating, because I actually wasn't a very geeky kid. I sort of had my popular moments, and so I hid that I was a person who read a lot and wrote poetry. And then in college, I was very serious and did independent studies in poetry. And when I got out of college, I started to publish a lot of poetry. Something I decided by graduate school I didn't want to do. I didn't want to be a poet.
What did you want? You want to be a professor?
I did. I found, I guess I was bored with my own voice. I thought, you're never going to be the greatest. And I was curious about history and culture. And I didn't want to be stuck inside my poetry. So I branched out.
It takes a pretty self-aware person to realize, hey, I'm not going to be the great. Most people think they're going to be the greatest,
Also, I don't know. I mean, I loved writing. I also realized that the distilled, the short form of a lyric poem didn't give me enough scope. I love to write, and I discovered I really liked writing paragraphs. And I loved interpretation. I mean, I think and the project I'm doing now is really about the joy of interpretation that anybody, and of meaning making that anyone can participate in. And I found that writing a poem didn't give me as much scope for that. There were plenty of great poems out there I could interpret and share with others.
Talk about the project. Talk about what inspired the project. Give our audience some background on what it is and where it's going.
So the project is called Poetry in America, and it is a multi-platform, multimedia project that whose goal is to expose learners, casual learners as well as formal learners everywhere, to the experience of reading a poem, and especially reading a poem with others. I think of poetry as the original social media. People, the oral poets would sit in a stand before a fire and chant, so that's our overall mission. The project includes an online course that's offered by Harvard X through edX, in which I trace the whole history of American poetry in a format that's more like documentary television than like a professor standing at a lectern. And so we visit Walt Whitman's Brooklyn and T.S. Eliot's London. I offer reflections of my own, but I draw little seminars on camera with me, sometimes with experts, but very often with people on the street. And over the last few years, I've been lucky enough to entice distinguished people from all walks of life to spend a half an hour with me sitting and reading a poem. And those kinds of readings we can talk about more are part of the online course. The project also includes a television series in development with WGBH and celebrated producer David Grubin, who's made dozens of terrific documentaries. So it's really exciting to be co-producing this TV show. And then project that, as an educator, is really close to my heart. A big push to help teachers and their students nationwide and eventually worldwide to feel more comfortable, to challenge themselves, to read what the writers of the Common Core, whatever you think of the Common Core, call complex texts. How do we help students to navigate a text that may present some obscurity, where some vocabulary may be unfamiliar? It's my belief that poems are actually ideal texts to use with students who may be intimidated by reading. They often have powerful emotional content. They may resist immediate interpretation, but they're short after all. You don't have to have done your homework. Right. Poems right there in front of you. And so I am creating courses for middle and high school teachers especially, and content they can take into their classrooms that will help them all and help all of us become better readers.
Yeah. And what inspired this? Was there a moment where you said, hey, something like this needs to exist, or was frustration with something?
What really happened is that online learning and the opportunity to reach many more people than I do in my Harvard classroom. 2013, all of a sudden, Harvard was offering me a class, the whole world as a classroom, and moreover, offering me the opportunity to see what I could do using video and using really great sound. What would it be like if I could take the archival documents? I'm a collector of archival documents. What would it be like if we could be showing, the Harper's Magazine in which Longfellow's poem appeared, or Emily Dickinson's manuscripts, or when I talked about Hart Crane's poem to Brooklyn Bridge. Here's a few lines from it. It's very beautiful. So think about, hold Brooklyn Bridge in your mind. The poet says, "Oh, harp and altar of the fury fused, how could mere toil align thy choiring strings?" That's really elevated language that I think when I recite it like that, most people say, "Oh yeah, God, Brooklyn Bridge."
Right.
It does look like a musical instrument. It's so beautiful. You actually want language that feels like prayer, even as you're going about your business. But to go back to what this media can do for us, when you hear those lines, you really do want a beautiful image, one of the great photographs of the bridge.
Right.
You really do want to be looking at it. And so when I had the opportunity to just begin to experiment with great video, with great images, I realized that I could create learning experiences that really had reach, and that the internet and that technology made it possible for the intimacy of poetry to be very, very widely experienced. I also realized, as I was doing this work making a MOOC, that we didn't quite have our audiences. We didn't quite know whom we were reaching, and there might be ways for me to reach not only discretionary learners, because after all, most of the people who take a MOOC in poetry are just doing it for their pleasure and their enlightenment, and they're not getting, most of them are not getting a credential out of their MOOC that is going to, they may get a certificate, but the credential is not going to, get them a new job.
Right.
Yes, I've completed this poetry course. But in fact, I realized there were people who needed credentials, and who needed to be teaching just this content, and who probably didn't know how, because poetry, the teaching of poetry and the teaching of close reading has really fallen by the wayside. And so, could I take content that I filmed, say content on poetry of the city? Could I take that content and craft it and shape it so that it really met the needs of teachers and the students in their classrooms? And this material that I've been working on for just a worldwide audience of discretionary learners could actually help to narrow the achievement gap, could actually help to give teachers tools that they've been asking for. And so the first of these courses for teachers, called Poetry of the City, is within, we say coming soon. It's within a few months of launching, and that course in some way realizes all of my, synthesizes so many of my hopes. Just give you an example of some things I love about it. Well, it's by a stroke of amazing good fortune, I was able to meet and befriend Nas, hip hop artist Nas. We met at Harvard, and I had about a half an hour with Nas, and we sat together talking about his art, which I admire tremendously. I think he's an extraordinary poet as well as performer. I admire his art, and I was telling him some of the reasons why, and I brought him some classic poetry of urban American life, including Walt Whitman. And we opened up the Walt Whitman together, and I said, well, why don't you just read some? And he began to read to me, and he looks up after two lines, and he goes, he's got it going on. And we began to sit and interpret the Whitman together. And he said, I really like this. Can we do this again? And I said, well, of course we can do this again. And in fact, I think it would be really great for students and teachers if you and I became co-interpreters of Whitman, and this could anchor a whole course on the poetry of the city. And so this course, Poetry of the City, beginning with the greatest of poets, Walt Whitman, whom anyone can come to love, but very few students actually study. This course returns week after week to a conversation I have with Nas, and also with a wonderful teacher from LAUSD named Tariq Smith. So Tariq joins the conversation with Nas, and we we work on these poems together. This Poetry of the City course will also it will take us deeply into Whitman's Brooklyn and Whitman's Lower Manhattan, filmed on location in all of those places. But the second part of the course will bring us to San Francisco and for our obligatory and delightful experience of the beats, and to Chicago, and take us into the explosion of poetry we're seeing now in the 21st century with slam and spoken word, and of course with hip hop.
So you're hitting on some big topics for me. One, because before this I was working for Nas and his manager Anthony Sillett.
Yes.
At the venture capital firm Queensbridge.
Wow.
I was a huge fan. So before that, I had a sort of a rap tech company, and I've been very interested in slam and spoken word. In what ways is there any element of like HBO, Def Jam poetry that will be in Poetry in America, or sort of just the spoken word slam scene in general?
Well, I would love recommendations.
Yeah, perfect.
We are, and something that I am really delighted to discover is that there's so much for me to learn.
Right.
I'm trained as a scholar of classic American poetry, and I love that tradition. This project has allowed me to, learn a lot about contemporary writing, and I would say that I'm a beginner.
Right. Cool.
But I have some great teachers.
Yeah.
The winner of the slam poetry National Slam Poetry Competition of 2014, Clint Smith, read with me a few weeks ago. Recited some of his work. Do you say recited in slam? Yeah. Performed some of his work, and also came and also discussed County Cullen, the Harlem Renaissance poet, with me, and making those connections, which is, these are such important connections for Nas, who knows that his music has its roots in jazz and in R&B, and that there's a whole tradition trying to offer learners the full pleasure of discovering a tradition, which means there's always more.
Yeah, absolutely. In sort of an ideal world where Poetry America achieves everything you want it to achieve, what will you have accomplished?
I will have put poetry as art form in the public sphere in a way that it isn't now, where I will have helped the larger poetry community by making clear to people who don't read poetry, who don't think of poetry as an art form that they can enjoy, making clear to them that it's really that they can. It's one can go on one's smartphone. The Poetry Foundation has an app that will give you a poem for every occasion and every place. And the sort of refreshing intellectual exercise, but also the sort of mindfulness possibilities of just dwelling in exquisitely crafted language that speaks to something you yourself are experiencing, whether it is looking at the Brooklyn Bridge, or suffering a breakup, or playing basketball, or playing soccer, or that there is poetry for all of this. And I'd really like to be reaching all generations. And so I think of myself as addressing this work to two really neglected communities of learners. On the one hand, these teachers and kids in schools who often think of English language arts as what you do so that you can pass a test and prove you comprehend, rather than a place where you grow skilled and confident at making meaning and at understanding your world. And to say that I want to reach those teachers and those students, that also means those parents, the parents of those children who are not on the the handouts that come home or whatever comes home now on the iPad. They're not seeing their children engage in these exercises of meaning making and not having the opportunity to do that with them. To say, and I'll give you a line from a poem I really love by Ed Hirsch, and this poem will actually be one a television episode is based on. So the poem is called Fast Break, and it's about the play of fast break in a basketball game. And it's a very beautiful poem. It's also an elegy for a friend. The poet once played basketball. He was in a pickup adult basketball team. His friend died, and so this poem is about the love of players for
Right.
each other, what it feels like on a team, and it's very tender. You know, it's just about the sport. The whole lexicon is full of hook shots, and but it's very, very tender. In any case, so the first line of the poem is this: the hook shot kisses the rim. The hook shot kisses the rim. Now, kisses, that's figurative language, right? It's exactly right for what it means for the hook. You know, there's that lingering touch. It expresses how sweet it feels to get, but it also introduces us in an amazing way to how this poem is about love.
Right.
You know, it's about love of the sport and love of human beings. And so if I am able to make it possible for kids in classrooms who love the game to just be stopping over that line, the hook shot kisses the rim, and to be curious and to learn that kisses is a cue, that in itself will help you understand the whole poem. Even though it's written in couplets, that's enough. So that's one set of audience, and I'm thinking a lot about the things people love to do, about basketball, about football, about skateboarding, about the instruments they play, about the music they listen to. What are the things we love, and how can we understand that language is a resource for us to enhance our love of the things we do anyway. And on the other side, and this is the other side of college, there are the hungry lifelong learners. And that phrase tends to refer to the hungriest, and those are people from 70, you know, who are 60 to 80, and they are 60 to 100 actually. I've got, you know, dozens and dozens and dozens of them online, all talking to each other. That's when people, you know, really, really want to learn. When when meaning making matters to them, and when they're sick, and when they're dying, meaning making becomes that much more important. But I have discovered by teaching online that the college students whom I meet every day, who are often pretty distracted, and they have they're like falling in love, they're breaking up, they've got extracurriculars, they're building their careers, and these are all they're the right things for them to be doing. It's all just fine. They're not fully focused on what I am teaching them, and I wasn't fully focused either. And I think that developmentally we're a little bit mixed up. This whole institution of college, where they're supposed to be building their careers and finding their life partners or discovering they don't want, and also mastering all this content. Maybe what it's not like I don't think there's any value in it, but when they get to be 35 or 40 and they've landed somewhere, that's when their curiosity actually starts to awaken again. And I was really surprised when I started making online courses that fully a third of the people studying with me were in their 30s and 40s. And really? I was surprised by that. And it really is something like, you know, there are actually lots of kids and homeschoolers, and I mean, I have students who are as young as 8 and as old and over 100. But it really is the case that at all of and very few college students who are, you know, they're busy. And so I'm really interested in beginning to help people understand that learning really is lifelong, and that to add a little more, that we don't only learn in a course. You know, you don't have to start on week 1 and end at week 15 in order to have had a successful learning experience. And when criticisms of MOOCs began to kind of bubble up in the cultural Weltanschauung, there was all this criticism. People don't finish these courses. It seems like a silly criterion to me. If you take a course for discretionary reasons, it's sort of like the restaurant you choose. You don't go to the same restaurant every.
Right.
You go because you want to, because it's a rewarding place for you to go.
Right.
And so if I can teach, if I have a course that's launching right now on April 8th on modernism, and it's 8 weeks of content on modernism, and it includes T.S. Eliot, it includes Robert Frost, and it includes, wild and crazy Edna St. Vincent Millay, who really was wild and crazy, even though her name was Edna, which is hard to, she called herself Vincent. I can absolutely understand that if I were taking this in a discretionary way, I doubt I would do the whole course.
Right.
I would say, oh, I'm kind of interested in Edna St. Vincent Millay. I'll wait for that.
Yeah.
I find myself at home with a cup of coffee on a Sunday morning. I think I'd like to, I know this is a place I can go to have a learning experience. I'll go do it, and maybe I'll pop in again. And especially for people who are learning for their own enrichment, that is a much more sensible expectation than to think that they failed if they haven't finished the course.
Same with, to continue the restaurant analogy, if you don't finish every crumb on your plate, it doesn't mean
That's right.
You don't love the restaurant.
If you don't, I thank you for that, for continuing the metaphor. We would call that a conceit, actually. If you don't have to finish every crumb on your plate.
And to that end of, I just want to echo, I believe there's a huge opportunity in adult education, just in general.
Yes.
Even I see among the elite of San Francisco who sort of done well in technology, maybe they didn't go to college, maybe they sacrificed some of that. So now they're far more curious, and they also have more time.
Yes.
It's like, what do they do now?
Oh, I know. I come out to Silicon Valley and find, all sorts of people who surprise me by being, incredibly successful in tech, and who also love poetry, or willing to teach me something, or to help me in one way or another.
So, when you talk about what ways to reach youth, and you talk about sports, and one way you're obviously doing it the right way is by working with Nas. Rap is such a huge, cultural phenomenon, especially for young people of all backgrounds, and it's that.
And it's so old-fashioned. I mean, it's sort of back to oral culture.
Yeah.
It's like.
It's bizarre that someone could say, "I love rap, but don't get poetry." It's like rap is poetry. It's just to a beat in the background.
It is. It absolutely is.
And so, how do you make sense of that, or when someone says that to you, or when you talk
that I like rap, but I don't like poetry?
Yeah. Or I feel like that's a common, or not that I don't like poetry, I just don't get it, or it doesn't spoken to them in the same way.
I think it's been badly taught. I think that the exuberance of this oral culture that surrounds hip hop reminds us of is that human beings like rhythmic language, that they enjoy it, rap is not all rap, but lots of it is distinguished for the complexity of its rhyme, and we love rhyme. Children love rhyme. Rhyme fell out of fashion in 20th century poetry. It came to seem contrived, but the delight in clever, unexpected rhyme that freshens the language, and that also allows us to experience the musicality of language, is so powerful. And hip hop is full of wonderful figurative language, as well as of mysterious. You know, some of the fun is mysterious language that asks you the question: are you the in group or the out group? You know, do you belong or not? And the pleasure of decoding that is complete. You know, and it's the same pleasure we have in slang when you know we invent new, like, you know, LOL or I love the pillows here. LOL or OMG.
Right.
I mean, the reason we like using these acronyms now is the same reason we like poetry if we like it. It's that something is that we human animals are our distinctive faculty is our linguistic one, and we always want to be, as you know, as the modernists said, we always want to be making it new. So I think that poetry is badly taught. It's been made into this thing that you do in school. Lots of teachers feel uncomfortable with it, and so what they say is, well, what's the deeper meaning? And you're like, oh God, I'm surely not adequate to that. What's the deeper meaning? What's the meaning underneath the words? Instead of, you know, as we do with all other art forms, we encounter them in a less invasive and frontal way. So I mean, I really believe in, and this project has now taught me. I have had one-on-one conversations now with dozens of people about, you know, some very famous, some very, but usually famous for something else. Dozens of people about a poem, and I mean, there's scarcely one I can remember who didn't, at the end of our conversation, say, that was so much fun.
Yeah.
That was so much fun, because it's, you know, it's also like, sometimes the best conversations one has with people are when it's about something rather than, you know, it's better to go to a museum on a date or something on a date. And they'll often say, go to the zoo, instead of just saying, oh, so what do you do? What do you like? Who did you break up with last? You know, the intimacy that becomes possible when two people have decided to look at the same thing and spend some time on it is really remarkable. And one finds that you sharpen each other's wits and there's just this conversational flow that occurs. You're like, wow, that was really fun. That was and so this project of mine is an attempt to put on, you know, online, on TV, in short form journalism. This is really what it is to experience a poem. It's not to have this block of print with 4 multiple choice questions, you know, challenging you to say something, or to say something really profound. Like, there's this awful expectation that whatever a poem is really saying must be some very deep, profound, usually a cliche, like everyone's the same, or, you know, we should all love each other, or nature's beautiful, or, you know, there's that expectation that we should be extracting a moral, improving gist is limited.
There's this one quote, I think it's by Mary Oliver, something like, everyone asks what it means, but instead of asking like how it makes them feel, or
and there's a wonderful poem by Billy Collins where he describes the poem tied to a chair and beaten with a hose in order to confess its meaning. And he says, you know, the poem's really not like that. It's really like the guy the guy on water skis who goes by and goes, hey, it's not supposed to be torture.
Right.
And most poems really,
Yeah.
good poems really aren't torture. They're just, and you don't even, I'm a big fan of poetry in one's peripheral vision, which means it could just be a line. It could just be the hookshot kisses the rim that you walk around with, and not, or I mean, okay, so here's a whole stanza. This is Emily Dickinson. So I know she's a 19th century poet. That seems scary, but listen, and I'm in the Bay Area, so this may not. This weather reference may not work for you, but I assume there are others out there listening. So here's a stanza of Dickinson. There's a certain slant of light, winter afternoons, that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. Now, I walk around, I live in Boston, the afternoons in February, they just come slamming in like thunderous chords on a church organ, and they do something. The quality of that light does something to you, and when that light at 4 o'clock comes slamming in, those lines, just that. I don't remember the rest of it. I couldn't recite, well, I can in fact recite the rest of the poem, but and the Brooklyn Bridge, I mean, if you just walk around with one line of that Hart Crane, or I'll give you one more example. Unfortunately, this is again a New England example. It is where I live. Robert Frost has a poem that begins, nature's first green is gold, the hardest hue to hold. Well, when those leaves first come out, the teeny weeny little tender leaves first come out on the trees, it's like they don't even have all their chlorophyll or something. They're gold. Yeah. And they come out, and the day they come out, and the first green is gold. And I just like having those lines. Right. And I say them to my children, my children say, nature's first green is gold, the hardest hue to hold. That's fun to share that.
Absolutely. Was there ever a time, or when was a time where poetry was sort of as part of popular culture as sort of hip hop is today?
In the 19th century. And
when did it stop being that way? Just gradually? Or?
No, I think modernism. I'm about to launch this whole big course on modernism. And modernism is a fantastic, fascinating movement. But modernist poets were many of them, they were mad at the bourgeoisie. Right. And they were mad at the idea that poetry should be for families. But in the 19th century, there wasn't a lot to do in the evening. Think about it. If you didn't have electric light and you were burning expensive whale oil or something in your lamps, and you weren't really ready to go to bed, well, what you would do is you would gather around the fire with the family, or with your sewing circle, or with your drinking buddies. And often people would read out of a magazine like the Atlantic Monthly. And, if you don't have, Netflix, and you stop going to church, you really your imagination is hungry. And so the periodicals, especially if you were out on the prairie somewhere, the periodicals you would get were really your evening entertainment. And you would read the fiction, and you would read the poetry, and people would memorize poetry. In the later part of the 19th century, the recitation of poetry became just standard in schools, and when you, in fact, and remained standard into the early decades of the 20th century. And if you talk to someone older, I've had a few conversations with senators, and John McCain and I had a conversation about poetry, and he said he memorized poetry in school. And Senator Simpson, I sat next to Senator Simpson, and he starts reciting Longfellow to me. And yeah, people, just as people do in slam poetry, you'd get up on the platform and you would recite your poem.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was a great thing for kids to do. It gave them, stage presence and confidence and performance, and was a mental exercise as well. So what actually happened was that with the birth of modernism, modernist poems said, we're not about the home and family. We are edgy.
Yeah.
I mean, modernism is a youth movement, and it's a poetry. Much modernist poetry is it's difficult, and it's rebellious, and it's not for broad. It's sort of not for broad consumption. And modernism was embraced by academia. Just the idea of a hard poem that would take a whole class hour to read.
Right.
Let's treat poetry not as a public art or something that can be in your peripheral vision, but as a very, very serious business, academic business on which we can do, where we can do research on it too. And there's much good that has come of that. There's been interesting research done on poetry, but by taking this public art form and turning it into a highly specialized academic subject, we've lost a lot of its juice.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remind it, the juice is still there.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because, just to exaggerate for a second, we don't teach rap in schools or hip hop in school, and yet it's incredibly popular. And we teach poetry in schools. And
we don't teach that much poetry either.
Oh, yeah.
So, no.
Okay. Yeah.
Well,
right.
But rap, I will be teaching, or no, that would be silly. Since I don't need to be teaching hip hop. I will bring practitioners into my project who will teach me.
Yeah.
And as Nas has been teaching me, and I'm having a conversation with the current Nas fellow at the Hip Hop Archive at Harvard. We're scheduled to have a conversation that will become part of this project. And really, it's going to be Hip Hop 101 for me. I actually know some of it, but assuming that others would benefit from learning about it as an art form, he will teach me, and will capture some of the richest hip hop archives.
That's fascinating. One thing I'm just sort of thinking out loud, and I don't know what the answer is part of the reason why hip hop is so popular is because it is an industry. It is a way that rappers make a living, or aspire to make a living. And so they're very familiar with all sort of social media, sort of tools to reach the people today. And this whole ecosystem, record labels, there's magazines, there's a whole real ecosystem around it. That's for poets trying to make a living today. There certainly isn't, to the extent that there is rap. And does that have to exist? Real way for poets to make a living, so people can. What do you think about that?
That's an interesting question, and I'm probably not the person to ask. It's the ecosystem of the music industry, right, and of mass culture. That supports, as well as an ethos within hip hop of social mobility and advance, that I think is a really powerful part of hip hop culture, and a success ethos that I think is really, really important. I think if you asked most practicing poets today, would you like a poetry label? I don't know. Some might say yes.
Right.
I think that many like teach. I mean, the infrastructure that poets have is that many of them teach, and they become although we have a poet who just did Hamilton on Broadway,
Yeah.
amazing poet
Right.
who just did Hamilton on Broadway, which opens the world. But Kendrick Lamar, I mean,
Right.
it's, you know, people are, our world is being broken wide open. That said, this is not just it's not just a performance art, it's actually a form of intellectual self-help and of soul making.
Yeah.
And I think that lots of poets I talk to, even though their downsides, and I've said some of them, to the academicization of poetry, you know, to put poetry in the university
Yeah.
has costs.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, lots of poets get jobs in universities
Right.
to pay the bills, or in prep schools. I know poets
Yeah.
who are, and actually now in content creation. I mean,
Right.
there's so much poetry, and this is another thing I'm just learning about. So much poetry and so many poets out in, you know,
Right.
out in the world of tech.
Mm-hmm.
I have a remarkable number of people I've worked with.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they'll be making my website and they'll say, "Oh, I'm a poet."
Yeah.
You know, this is what, and I love doing this work because it really is about composition.
Yeah.
And storytelling, and often about distilled storytelling. So I'm not sure that we need poets to have poetry labels.
Right.
But who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're in a really fertile transitional moment that I feel really privileged to be part of.
Yeah.
And I love having a front row seat on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So I want to be sensitive to your time. This has been a fantastic chat. Well, just sort of last minute, you know, for people listening, who are fascinated about your work and want to, whether they're experienced with poetry or they want to get into it, where can they learn more? You mentioned April 8th is your next one.
April 8th is the launch of Part 6 of the Poetry in America massive open online course. And I think some listeners who wanted to explore should go to edX or just type Poetry in America Modernism or my name, Elisa New, into Google, and you will find it, or maybe you guys will make the link available. But also coming very soon, Poetry of the City for middle and high school teachers and their students. And soon after that, Poetry of Earth, Sea, and Sky on Poetry of the Environment, as well as Poetry of Art, Sport, and Play.
Wow.
All courses we're making for teachers.
Perfect. So you see,
and my TV series that will, we hope, air late in 2017.
So Poetry in America, you know, when you think about the different ways in which you reach people, it's a TV show, it's courses, it's online content.
Online content, and my website, which is about to launch.
Perfect.
But hasn't, and all of my content will be
when it does, make sure to promote that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you very much, Eric.
Awesome. Okay, so this.
So this is